back to the Peace, Love, Hormones podcast. Today, I'm going to be talking about arousal and libido, especially as it pertains to women's health and the female libido and arousal process and journey. But a lot of things that we're going to be talking about in today's episode, as well as the follow-up part 2, are going to be things that pertain to men as well. So before we start, a little disclaimer: everyone is very unique. One thing that stays consistent on this podcast and across all of my social media platforms, as well as the Peace, Love, Hormones brand, is bio-individuality. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today, please take with a grain of potassium. This in no way, shape, or form is medical advice. This is a podcast, so it's an educational platform. So again, this is not medical advice. I'm not diagnosing anyone with anything. We are just going to be going over some of the important things when it comes to female and just overall human health as it pertains to arousal and libido. And in both this episode and especially in the follow-up, we are going to be talking about herbal interventions and herbal aphrodisiacs. So again, these are not prescriptions. These are not a you must do this, you must do that, you shouldn't do this. This is, again, just education. Take what resonates with you. And I hope that this episode, along with all of my other episodes, really just inspires you to do your own research. Every person is different in what makes them aroused as well. So while I will be going over some things that may make us feel aroused or may impact our arousal and impact our libido, this again could resonate with you and it may not. And before we start, I want to give an overview really quickly of what libido is and what arousal is. I see often that these two terms kind of get put into one and they're interchangeable. And while arousal and libido are very closely related with one another, they are actually slightly different. So libido, we hear libido a lot, so we'll start with the libido. Libido refers to a person's overall sex drive, whereas arousal refers to the physiological and psychological readiness for sexual activity, as well as, because arousal encompasses a lot, as well as just our overall feeling of being embodied and sensually active and aware. And arousal comes into play in many different areas of our life. So we could feel aroused while we are doing something that we love, such as going on a hike or baking or making herbal medicine or taking herbal medicine or taking a bite into a fresh, juicy strawberry. So arousal is many things. It is definitely not limited to the bedroom or limited to wherever you love to have sexual play. It's definitely not reserved just for that. Again, arousal is everywhere around us, and hopefully we are living lives that do make us feel very aroused, because arousal is this feeling of excitement and, again, feeling embodied, sensually embodied. And these are wonderful things to feel. And if you're anything like me, you probably want to feel this more often than not, because again, it's a very, very wonderful feeling to feel fulfilled and excited and happy and just at peace and at home within your body. So I actually asked a few women in my life, including my mother, my sisters, my best friends. I said, what does arousal mean to you? And I asked arousal, not libido. And a few of the women actually responded with, as if I was asking them, what does libido mean to them? Which did show me that I wanted to dedicate just a minute or two to describing the difference between arousal and libido, although related, because we need to feel aroused in order to have a strong, healthy libido. So they are related, but slightly different. And anyway, all of their responses though, and the women who answered first for libido, and then I helped guide them to answer more about arousal, all of these women actually gave me examples and their own definitions that had nothing to do with being sexual or having sex or having intercourse or making love. A lot of it was just them feeling happy, them feeling fulfilled, them doing something that they love, doing something that excites them. So it was a really, really beautiful perspective, and thank you to all of the women who responded to me for that. And to anyone listening, please drop in the comments if you feel comfortable to do so. What does arousal mean to you, and what gets you aroused in this beautiful life that we get to live? Or you can just reflect on it personally. Let's talk about all the things that impact our arousal and therefore impact our libido. So first, we must talk about psychology. Our psychology plays a huge role in our overall feeling of arousal in this life and our ability to have a strong, healthy libido, our desire for sex, our desire to be vulnerable like that. And a lot goes into psychology in and of itself. Psychology is just this umbrella term. It takes into account our feminine energy. It takes into account our relationship dynamics and how safe and loved and supported that we feel in our relationship, especially when it gets to having libido and sexual desire with another partner. Our relationship is incredibly important because sex and love making starts outside of the bedroom. And that's just a common phrase, right? You may not be having sex in the bedroom, so just take that with a grain of potassium, but our relationship needs to fulfill different areas, and there are some stereotypical areas that our relationships need to fill, especially as women, and then a different subset as men. But again, this is where bioindividuality comes to play and unique relationships and the unique dynamic between each relationship. But our relationship is a huge part. It contributes to our feeling of safety and love and connectedness, and it's a huge part of psychology and a huge part of if we feel aroused and have a high libido. And then also I want to note with relationships too, rarely ever do two people in a relationship have the same amount of desire for anything, whether it be sex or cleaning the house or cleaning the dishes or taking care of the kids or walking the dog. Very rarely do two humans have the same amount of matched desire energy, especially in a relationship, in a partnership. So communication is key always. And beyond that, if you have any sort of doubts or struggles within your relationship, to definitely have those conversations. It will support your relationship as a whole and will support your sex and love making and play. And then stress levels and depression go into psychology too. And we could talk for a really long time about psychology, but I'm just going to give overviews. So another thing that impacts our arousal and our libido is our physiology. So we just said psychology, then there's physiology. Again, all of this is related because everything is connected within the body of the mind. But for all intents and purposes of being organized and kind of splitting things up for this episode, let's get into physiology. Physiology is really focusing on our processes and the biochemical processes of the body and our cellular health and how that relates to our overall health and well-being, including our psychology, of course, and to our arousal and to our desire for sex. Libido. So hormones are incredibly important when it comes to libido, like estrogen for women's juiciness and feeling of confidence and sexiness, testosterone as well for confidence, and then progesterone for our calmness. There's also the big correlation between our hormones and overall just our physiology changing throughout our menstrual, also known as the ovulatory cycle, also known as the infradian rhythm, which is the name for the biological internal rhythm that it is. Typically, we talk about how our libido and our desire for sex and play is changing as all of these biomarkers are changing throughout our cycle. And it's very, very true. But this doesn't mean that we don't have any desire for sex outside of ovulation, which is the very stereotypical time of the cycle where we're like, women are very confident and feeling sexy and want to get it on. Because again, of psychology and other things going on, you may be ovulating and not really feel in the mood for that, especially if you don't feel like you're in a safe relationship. And outside of that, you could be feeling high libido around ovulation and high libido all throughout your cycle as well. I do say, or I notice myself that our libido really does change, just like so many other things are changing throughout our cycle. So estrogen, which is our hormone most dominant in the first half of the cycle, provides this very lustful and sexy libido. Whereas progesterone, which is our lovely, incredible, super important hormone that is really dominant in the second half of the cycle, provides this more warm and melty libido. Both sound amazing, and how lucky are we to get to experience both and to more or less be able to predict when we are going to experience that. And progesterone is pro-thyroid, pro-metabolism, pro-nervous system. Progesterone is so important, and it doesn't get enough credit. So if you want to learn more about progesterone, I do have an entire podcast episode dedicated to talking about progesterone. Then we have our womb health, we have our overall reproductive health, we have our cellular health, our cellular metabolism, our ATP production, which is our energy. It is all correlated, and it is all important when it comes to our arousal and to our libido. And our nervous system, especially if our nervous system is imbalanced and we are in, more often than not, a state of fight or flight, high cortisol, high adrenaline, high noradrenaline, then our energy production that is going towards reproduction and fertility and just that energy for the sexual energy and libido and lust and arousal is going to be pretty minimal. So it makes sense, right? Like, even though our cycles are incredibly important for so many different aspects of our health, at the end of the day, it is a way, a means of reproduction. So our bodies are very, very smart. If they know that we are not getting the support that we need, whether it be through nutrition or whether it be we have really high stress and high inflammation, if it knows that we are not in a state to be reproducing, then we are not going to be, chances are, cycling, or we're going to be cycling very, very irregularly. So again, this is like just an innate mechanism of the body. It's a protection mechanism. It's very, very smart. So again, chances are, if you are feeling really stressed, or you are sick, or you are dealing with some sort of chronic health issue, reproductive energy and functioning may downregulate, and with it, arousal and libido. As we talked, that was all within physiology. Next, I want to talk about nutrition. Our nutrition is either life enhancing or it is the cause or contributor to whatever health issue that we are struggling with. If we are malnourished, we are then running on low fumes. We are in starvation mode. Our brain, our nervous system, everything is kind of freaking out, for lack of better terms. And our reproductive functioning is going to take the backseat, like I had just mentioned. Our brain is going to be more primed for survival, not really primed for reproduction and getting it on and being sexy in the bedroom. So for longer discussions on nutrition and my thoughts on fad diets and restrictive eating, I have plenty of podcast episodes on that. I recorded a 2-part series in the fall of 2023, breaking down some of the most common popular health trends and health fad diets, and I give the nuances to everything and provide some support when it comes to nutrition as a whole and how to really just take care of yourself and listening to your intuition, and also switching up your nutrition throughout your cycle. Next is sleep and stress. We don't have to talk too much about this. We know that obviously poor sleep and not sleeping enough and getting to bed too late, all of this also causes stress and inflammation. It impairs our cellular health and cellular metabolism and detoxification. It impacts our hormones. It impacts our hunger and satiety hormones, ghrelin and leptin, increases blood sugar the following day. It does a lot of things to the body that are not favorable. So we want to make sure that we are sleeping well and that we are managing our stress. And the two really do go hand in hand. Of course, you can be sleeping well and still experiencing really high stress every single day. But I've never seen anyone who isn't sleeping well and isn't stressed. So definitely prioritizing sleep and stress reduction and stress management, because there's only so much we can do. Obviously, there are some stressors in this life that we must endure, but we can change our perspective about it. And then number 5 would be tissue health. So we did psychology, physiology, nutrition, sleep and stress, and tissue health. So our tissues really are important when it comes to our arousal and our libido. It is very important to ask, are our tissues moist and warm? Because that's very important when it comes to, number 1, producing our fluids that we need for reproductive health and for getting it on and, playtime. If our tissues and our organs are more cold and dry, it's going to be really hard to create those pleasure juices and to get in the mood in general. And chances are we're probably experiencing circulation issues as well. So it's hard to get circulation to our reproductive organs for not just arousal and libido, but overall reproductive functioning. So Healthy tissues equal healthy hormones, which equals healthy feminine sexual energy and masculine sexual energy as well. So it's important to know all of these things that can impact our libido. It's not necessarily always a matter of are you attracted or are you not attracted to your partner when it comes to arousal and libido. Once we know any root causes in terms of why your libido and your arousal is low. Is it the stress? Is it inflammation? Is it a lack of sleep? Is it not feeling fulfilled in your career? Is it relationship stress and not feeling in alignment with your partner? Is it your hormones? There are many, many things that impact libido. So once we understand your particular root cause, we can use herbs and nutrition and lifestyle changes to remedy the situation and to boost your arousal and to boost your libido, which is wonderful. And in part 2 of this series, which will be released depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this live time, it will be released next Wednesday. And perhaps you're listening to this a few months after it's already been released, and part 1 and 2 are already out. But part 2, I will be talking about all herbal interventions, and I have many previous episodes on nutrition. So for discussions when it comes to nutrition and wholesome nutrition that supports overall health and well-being, including hormone health, reproductive health, arousal, libido, reflect back on those episodes. So as we are closing up this specific episode where it's really just a nice juicy overview of arousal and libido and what impacts our arousal and libido, so we can do a little internal reflection to see if any of these things may be impacting how we are showing up and feeling in our present life, I want us to all take a moment for a reflection. You do not have to write down these questions that I'm about to ask you. I will have these in a blog post, and that blog post is going to be linked in the show notes of this podcast episode. It's going to lead you to the Peace Love Hormones website with all of the show notes for today's episode, as well as these questions. I highly, highly recommend after this podcast episode reflecting on these questions. And don't worry if you can't answer them all. I would recommend just screenshotting it or copying and pasting it over into your iPhone note, for example, because most of us have our phones with us on a daily basis, and reflect over these questions, especially the ones that you are unable to answer at this moment, over the next few weeks to come. So here are some questions that I ask myself to do tune and check in during times of my life where I'm not feeling as zesty and fiery and spicy, and I would encourage you all to reflect on as well. What emotions or sensations accompany your arousal? Is it excitement? Is it relaxation or anticipation? Are there specific thoughts or fantasies that tend to accompany your arousal? How does your environment contribute to or inhibit your arousal? Consider the lighting, music, privacy, exposure. Are there any specific scents, taste, or textures that enhance your arousal? Do certain types of touch or physical sensations increase your arousal? Are there any past memories that affect your current arousal patterns? Have you noticed any changes or patterns in your libido throughout the course of your cycle and throughout the course of the last 5 to 10 years of your life? Are there any cultural or societal factors that impact your perception of arousal? How do you typically respond to changes in your arousal levels? Do you embrace them? Do you suppress them? Do you explore them? Do you judge yourself? Are there any activities or practices that consistently enhance your arousal or libido? How do you communicate your arousal needs and desires to yourself and or to your partner? What role does self-care play in nurturing your arousal and libido? How do you define and prioritize pleasure in your life beyond sexual experiences? I love that last question, especially. I love all of these. And I will, again, include these in the blog post, and the link to this will be in the show notes of this episode. Knowing what turns us on is just as important as knowing what turns us down. Sometimes, actually, it's a little bit more important to know what turns us down so we know what to refrain from. This knowledge, coupled with the understanding of any potential root causes that are going on that are causing low arousal and low libido, helps us to create a really well-rounded holistic protocol, including herbal medicine, nutrition, and lifestyle changes to bring you back into your own pleasure or to enhance your pleasure. In part 2, I'm going to be talking about herbal aphrodisiacs, the wide range of herbal aphrodisiacs that can be used in both the acute term to help spice up the moment and can and perhaps even should be taken in the long term to support your reproductive health, your emotional health, your nervous system health, your hormone health, your just overall health and well-being. And all of this relates back to our arousal and therefore to our libido. I love herbs, so I'm really excited for part 2. So I definitely recommend subscribing so you can listen to that episode right when it comes out. So that concludes all of the notes for this part 1. If you enjoyed it, please do share it on your stories or share it with a loved one, a family, or a friend. And I think that's all I have to say. So I'm not going to keep you here too much longer. Thank you again for tuning in. With lots of love from my heart to yours. And until next time, peace, love, hormones.